Councilmember Galani. Councilmember Hopper. Councilmember Jaxi.
Here.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Here.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Bros.
Here.
Councilmember Garitano.
Here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo. Councilmember McCutcheon.
No.
Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Councilmember Nyan. Councilmember Bartoni. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Okay, welcome everyone. Hope your week is off to a great start. We have 15 items under information before we go to action items. Is there anything under information that any member of the council would like to discuss or about which you have a question? Councilmember Dodwell.
I just wanted to see if we have a timeline put together for the internet access proposals and when those are going to be completed review by the consultants. So we kind of have some timeline on when decisions will have to come to council.
That question is very timely because shortly we will be discussing that under our strategic plan. And I just talked with our city administrator about that this afternoon. Mr. Cross, would you like to update the council on what you told me this afternoon?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Dodwell and council members, Joe and I last spoke with CTC, the city's consultant for internet, on, I believe it was Thursday of last week. The term sheet that we have discussed at previous meetings here is in the hands of Metronet. I was hoping to get it no later than Friday so that we could discuss it today, but that did not happen. And the reason that that didn't happen is that the investment group, there was a new investment group involved with CTC, and they think there's a little bit of a slowdown. They said, don't read anything into it. It's not that, they're disagreeing with anything. It's just that they're just trying to get through those terms. So quite honestly, Ms. Dodwell, I am expecting to see that any day, maybe tomorrow or Wednesday, sometime this week. I'm pretty sure. We really tried to get it for tonight, but unfortunately, we just can't control Metronet.
One thing I would add, just to put this out there ahead of time relative to our discussion later under strategic plan and the money. For purposes of our discussion tonight, Steve, based on our talk this afternoon, he indicated, our city administrator, that we could safely assume, hopefully on the lesser side, but safely assume somewhere between 7 and 10 million as a price tag for that. Correct? Okay. Which is really what I was after for strategic planning. Obviously, we want to get this stuff nailed down otherwise, but we've got that part. Okay. Anything further, Councilmember Dodwell? All right. Anything else under information that Councilmember Rambo?
Yes, this will be real quick. The update regarding the reserve, it seems that we haven't, that our consultants have yet to be granted access to the site, and I'm hoping that we consider that the timeline for the 60-day response starts when they actually have access to the site. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Is there any objection from any member of the council to that assumption that the 60 days for purposes of the review that was previously approved by the council for the reserve would start from the day they have access? Seeing no objection, that's what it'll be. City Director of Planning, Joe Benich, do you have any objection to that?
No, sir, not at all. I've tried on 3 occasions to talk with the attorney, and one of those was just today. So I think that's a fair request and certainly will allow us to be finished when we get to that 60 days.
Okay. So seeing no objection, that's what it'll be. I'm sure the developer would probably be okay with that as well. So I don't think there is any downside to that. Okay, anything further, Councilmember Rambo? Councilmember Edens?
Yes, so I was just looking at the ash tree update, and it sounded like or at least how I interpreted it, was there was less ash trees than we thought that were worth saving, so we might have over budgeted. I was just wondering if we could use that for maintenance in other areas. So when I was driving down 109, and I've noticed this before, that the medians, there's some dead things that need replaced, and also on 100, where we did the beautification process, it looks like we've got a couple of things that died and aren't making it back up. And then I've heard tell that Strucker Road has some issues. So I'm not sure if any of that is under warranty. I was part of the group that did the park planting out at Chesterfield before, and it looks like some of those plants, like some of the black-eyed Susans and shrubs maybe didn't make it either. Can we do some sort of inventory of what needs to be maintained throughout the city and put some of the extra money towards that? And then my other question was,
Extra money from what again?
well, I at least read the report that we had budgeted more for treating ash trees than we'll be able to do because there's less that we can save. So it looks like we might have some other money built in for replacing some other sickly looking things, especially that 109 stretch.
So let's just make sure it's okay to do that.
Okay.
City Attorney Young, if the council has approved a resolution allocating X dollars for X project that don't get used, what is the possibility of using some of those funds for substantially similar type things, beautification, repair, and so forth?
It really depends on how it's identified in the budget. If the funding is identified in the budget, then certainly it can be done. Now, if the scope of the contract is very limiting in terms of the replacement, but I would ask Director of Public Works to confirm, but I believe the contract for the tree replacements was a little bit more broad than that.
Rick
Yeah.
Brown, what's your response to that?
Thank you, Mayor Boland. We do have a separate budget item for landscaping, which is what we would typically use for addressing the issues that were raised by Councilmember Eden. So we can certainly go through and make note of any deficiencies. There are some more recent plantings, yes, that are under warranty that could be removed and replaced in that manner. The trees and the treatments are under a line item in the capital improvement budget that was strictly for replacement and treatment of ash trees. So we would have to adjust that through a mid-year budget adjustment to move it into landscaping if necessary at a later date, I would suspect.
Okay. So bottom line is, it sounds like we have the money already in the budget. So there would be, if I'm interpreting what Rick said correctly, there would be no need to worry about applying the extra from the ash tree project because we've already got in the budget to do that.
Okay, follow-up question.
Sure.
Well, first a statement. I hope we can look at those roundabouts too, because some of them look like they had some passing away of trees as well, to put it in a humorous way. But can we then use the leftover money allocated for new trees or removal of old trees? So we can't treat them. So can we use that money to get ahead of what we planned, Rick?
Councilmember Edens, we expect to have a fall tree planting project. So effectively, there'd be more money available for the fall tree planting project as a result of this. And I suspect with the onset of the emerald ash borer that we'll have plenty of needs there to address in the fall with replanting.
Yeah, I just knew there was a tree shortage, so I didn't know if we had to reserve them right away. Okay, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Sure, City Administrator Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Edens, just in general, okay, department heads are allowed to move dollars around within line items in their budget. We're not talking about going over budget, but depending on, as City Attorney Young pointed out, particularly with specific legislation, if it is general enough, okay, or in this particular case about treating trees and so forth, but generally speaking, within a budget, there is some latitude that the department head has to allocate dollars that are under budget and one to another, as long as it doesn't change the bottom line. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, and I think you said, I may have misunderstood, you asked if there was some way to kind of have an asset tracking mechanism about what we have in terms of trees and so forth. If I understood you correctly, and Director Brown can speak to this because they are developing that database. So in other words, when, say Brendan Maher is out, okay, we actually got him an iPad in there and he has software that he is able to, he's out there and he's logging all of this in. So a database that was kind of in place is now being backfilled with a lot of more information. Again, Director Brown can expand on this, but we are developing that database. Thank you.
Anything further?
Would you like me to add to that?
Oh, sure, Rick.
Just since we're on the subject, I'd be glad to give you a quick summary of the ash trees in the city of Wildwood are all entered into a program called Tree Keeper, which is accessible through our website. So any resident can go to that, any council member can go to it and view our current inventory of ash trees. What we hope to do is take it a step further and possibly through a trim grant this year, get an updated inventory of all the trees. And then that would also be folded into the Tree Keeper software, which again would be viewable online to any resident or any council member. So if you're interested in taking a look at it, you can find it through our public works site or give me a call. We could certainly direct you to it and try to help you out with regard to what's there. It's broken down by ward as well, so you can get an idea of, relative to the ash tree situation, how many ash trees are in your individual ward.
Okay. Any other questions on this? Councilor Rambo?
Yeah, sorry to be hammering on trees all the time, but this report indicates that the emerald ash borer is coming on a little stronger than even we feared, and that's why we're not treating as many trees. And I want to make sure I've stressed this in the past. These are highly toxic chemicals to bees, butterflies, and those kinds of things. And it's preferable. It's like chemotherapy. It's preferable to dying. But the goal for this was to kick the can down the road while we do removal of already dead trees. And so any money that we recover by not treating trees probably would be better. It would probably better serve the community if we went ahead and removed a few more of the dead or dying ash trees instead of trying to move money around. So that's.
I think we've had that discussion in the past as well.
Right.
So Councilor McCutcheon.
Yeah, Rick, can you address, I had an email this morning or this afternoon from you regarding replacing ash trees in Ward 5. They were scheduled for the fall. So in relation to that, Ms. Eden's request, how's that going to impact replacing those trees in Ward 5?
Well, as I think was referenced by Councilmember Rambo, I would agree. We feel like that the emerald ash borer has hit us pretty strongly, and we're going to see even more impact this summer than we did last summer. Exactly how much, nobody knows at this point. Andy's our best bet, and I do have Andy Berg on the Zoom call with us, so I might pull him into this discussion as well. But it's still really an unknown as to how many trees we're going to be removing this summer. It would be the intent to make that a priority to keep up with those removals first and foremost, and then the question is going to be how many can we replant this fall, and can we keep up with the removals of the replanting? My fear is that we're really just not going to be able to keep up with the removals with our replanting, and we're going to get behind because the EAB has really hit us strongly. And we have, over the last 3 years, we've already removed and replaced about 500 trees by my estimation, or maybe around 600 trees by my estimation. So we've made a dent in it already, but we still have a long ways to go. We've got a good 900 trees after we treat these 110. We still have a good 900 trees remaining that are going to die and that need to be replaced over the coming years. So anyway, it's bottom line is going to be a challenge. We're going to have to stay on top of this as best we can. As I mentioned earlier, I would like to get an updated inventory done through a trim grant potentially this year, so that we have the best numbers available to us to monitor this going forward. But in the fall, we'll be looking to plant as many trees as we can based on the budget that we have available at that time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else under information before we go into action items? Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, Dr. Rambo brought up a good point about the toxicity of the chemical, and I agree with him totally about that it's a better idea to do this than the danger that the trees would present if they were falling. My question would be that I think that Dr. Rambo brought this up last year, that the earlier in the season that we do this, the lower the dosage of the chemical that is needed. And because we did it later in the year, last year, is there a way we can use less of that toxic chemical?
I think that my understanding from that discussion is we were going to attempt to do that. Rick, short answer, we're doing that, aren't we?
Yes, we're following the instructions that are provided for that chemical, and the instructions allow you to vary it based on the size of the tree and the infestation rate. I'd like to get Andy Berg, if that's okay, to speak to this. He is on the call.
Well, I tell you, Rick, we can do that, but you're our director of public works. I think it's you know these things, so we're either doing it or we're not. And I don't think Andy's going to be able to give us much more on that. I mean, we can do that, but I think we're just looking from you at this point. Are we being mindful of using less chemical? Yes, no.
We're doing everything we can. Yes, sir.
Okay. I mean, if anyone wants to hear from the guy actually doing it in the field, but I think we're getting down in the weeds and trees a little much at this point at a council level with having the contractor here for that. But and I appreciate you having him here, Rick, but I guess what I'm saying is I trust you're doing your job and your judgment, and that's what you're here for. So and I'm seeing head shake yes. Okay. Anything further under information before we go to action items? Right. Okay. So we're going to go into action, and again, we have an executive session this evening, and the last couple of meetings, it has worked well in relation to our strategic planning to, for lack of a better way of saying it, sort of get that done before we move into the other stuff. And so if there's no objection to rearranging the agenda to doing that, I would propose that we do it. And if you're okay with that, I would entertain a motion for the executive session so we can have that. Made by Councilmember Rambo, seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Is there any discussion on that motion? This will need to be a roll call vote. As with everything connected with our executive sessions, seeing no discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll on the motion to go into executive session.
Councilmember Galani. Yes. Councilmember Hopper. Yes. Councilmember Jaxi.
I'll abstain.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
Councilmember Bros.
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano.
Aye.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo. Yes. Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan. Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion carries, and for social distancing and respecting of that and everyone's safety, we're going to stay in this room since we have more space. So what we need to do is we need to ask our guests, we're glad you're here, but if you would please excuse us just for a while so we can have a discussion in closed session, we would appreciate it. And everyone on the council, please look once, twice, and 3 times at your microphone that you have in front of you and make sure that the light is not on and it is off. And hold up on that, just 1 second. Actually, it's going to be a while, so you might want to pull those back. Actually, I said 1 second, it's going to be longer than that. And close your, what again, Stephen? Close laptops. So everyone's microphone is
There you go.
Okay, Steve. Where is council? Okay, council members, we are now back in session, open session. Travis, is everything a go? All right, thank you so much. And so we now need to, just a reminder, use our microphones. Next item on the list, or the agenda rather, is a City of Wildwood traffic study relative to the Monarch FRD CUP, Fire Protection FPD CUP, Fire Protection District CUP. You've been provided with my memo relative to that containing my recommendation. Does anyone want to make a motion? Councilmember Clark.
I will make the motion to approve going ahead with the traffic study.
Within 60 days or sooner?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilmember Brost. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have one opposed, Councilmember Edens. Is there anyone? Sorry. Who else was opposed?
I'm opposed, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you there, Don. My apology. Councilmember Bartoni just joined us. He's opposed. Councilmember Edens and Councilmember Bartoni are opposed. Any other opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving to, let's go ahead and, if you don't mind, and get our receipt and files taken care of here. Joe, doing things a little out of sequence. You have a couple of these, PZ 4-98 and Resolution 2021-01.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, as is the case with any conditional use permit, which is granted or amended by the Planning and Zoning Commission, the City Council has the right to exercise its power of review over their decision. In this case, the Planning and Zoning Commission granted a minor alteration to an exterior array of antennas to allow them to extend beyond the tower structure itself an additional 3 inches, 15 inches versus 12 inches. The tower antenna, the antennas on the tower are existing. It was discovered as part of a process that the Planning and Zoning Commission has been going through with this particular tower and set of exterior antenna for the last several months. The Planning and Zoning Commission supported such and granted the relief. Tonight, you are receipt and file of that action. And again, you have 15 days to exercise your power of review. If City Council chooses not to, the change would become effective at that time. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, if there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Joe? Joe, I have one question, and I know I've raised this at the P&Z level. I just don't recall the answer, and this possibly is for the city attorney. Many cities require these towers to be disguised as oak trees, palm trees, flagpoles, and so forth. What can we do relative to that, if anything? I know there was some recent Missouri legislation or something that may relate to this, I think. But.
Well, Mr. Mayor, not to usurp Mr. Young, our city attorney, but I'll just give you a bit of background. For many years, we did pursue disguised support structures. On this particular site, there are 2 towers. One is an artificial tree made to look like a tree versus a tower. Many of the instances, we went with flagless flagpoles to basically keep them as sleek as possible and place the antenna inside the tower itself. What we've been told and what we have discovered through research conducted by the city is that the monopoles with the antenna inside the tower have a far less reach in terms of the strength of their signal or the network. And now with 5G, almost all of that equipment has to be on the exterior of the tower structure and part of the antenna. And so, as I explained to the Planning and Zoning Commission last week, we've really been in a struggle. We know people need internet access, and we're doing everything we can to bring internet access to those residents that are underserved or unserved. And so we've kind of gone a little different direction and allowed exterior antenna arrays to improve the network in terms of its strength and area extent, and hopefully meet the demand in that regard. But certainly, if a new tower is proposed, we have the ability, I think, still to, I guess, not disguise it as much as we used to, but certainly limit its impact. Mr. Young, you know the federal and state law better than I.
Yes, the very short answer is the state has significantly reduced the city's authority over the installation of telecommunications towers, to the extent of we can require reasonable aesthetic items, but what is or is not reasonable at this point is going to have to be decided by a court because it is not known.
So does that mean by making requirements of the nature that I mentioned, possibly inviting litigation?
Yes, sir.
Well, we don't want to do that, but certainly at the earliest possible time, as I know you monitor those cases, if the courts decide that such things might be permissible, if you could please make note to let us know, or impermissible, we can get that determined. Okay, thank you, Joe and City Attorney. All right, any other questions or thoughts on PZ receipt and file item PZ 4-98? Okay, seeing none, Joe, resolution 2021-01.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, this is a receipt and filing item. There is no action requested of the City Council tonight. The resolution that is before you tonight was passed by the Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously at its meeting last Monday night, and it identifies the first group of properties to be considered for the application of the Special Circumstances Overlay District. The intent is to hold a public hearing on these properties, all being in the Strecker Road area on June 7th. If there are any questions, Mr. Young or I'm sure we'd be glad to try to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Dodwell.
Joe, my apologies, but real quickly, at 340 Turnberry Place, where is that?
It is of the Bliss site.
Okay.
It is addressed through the Turnberry subdivision for some reason.
Okay,
It's a landlocked parcel is all I can tell you.
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Joe or comments on resolution 2021-01? All right, seeing none, that takes us back to our last item, the infamous strategic planning. So council members, basically where we are as I see it, and feel free to let me know if you disagree with this, but we've gotten a lot accomplished, virtually, I would say completed, relative to identifying the main goals, identifying the sub goals, the responsible parties for those goals, the due dates, and we are now left with the funding. And principally as to the three extraordinary items that we've had a few council meetings to discuss, those being internet access, watershed erosion, and Lake Chesterfield. And we also have, and so those issues have yet to be decided conclusively by the council as to the mechanics of what and how we would go about providing funding. But my recollection is as to, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, my recollection is as to the internet access and the watershed erosion issue, the decision tentatively on a straw poll basis, if you will, was made by the council that it would look for funding those as long as there was participation with payback from residents that might be involved with those, specifically involved with those issues. Is that, I think that's accurate, is it not? Everyone agree with that? Not agree with that. Okay, we have disagreement with that. Councilmember Rose, what? Well, okay, there is, you just caused me to think of something. I think this was the distinction. My recollection is that there were some that were not willing to, some on the council were not willing to fund anything, but they would agree to be part of funding at least some of it if there was payback. Is that what? Is that
I would
close?
just say that we need to have a definitive discussion on funding.
Oh, we're going to have that.
Yeah,
for sure.
and because,
That's where we're headed.
yeah, we need to get there.
That's where we're moments away.
So I don't know if it really matters. What matters is what we do.
Agreed. I'm just trying to get the background stage set for recollection of people who may not have been here or may not recall, because it's been a few meetings. So I'm just trying to get it all teed up here. But you are correct. It's what you do ultimately. And so, Councilor McCutcheon, my apology. Mike.
Sorry. I thought the discussion on the watershed erosion was to issue a bond.
We can look in the minutes on that. That was from the last meeting. I think it was to have that looked at as a possibility, but.
Yeah, it was. That motion was actually delayed. It was postponed for 90 days.
Okay,
So
thank you.
it's not going to come back to council until then.
So in addition to our Sure, go ahead. City Administrator Cross is going to respond further relative to the internet issue that you raised, Councilor Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Brost and council, with regards to internet, the discussion that we had here in chambers had to do, the mayor had asked several questions, one of which, do you all feel that the city should fund some part or none of all of it or some of it or none of it of internet? Let's just leave it at internet. And the majority said, we can fund some of it. There was also a discussion regarding to, should we look to the provider, the internet provider, to provide some monies coming back to the city to help defray some of the costs? And the answer to that was yes. So in fact, the term sheet that I alluded to earlier did have that provision in the term sheet. In our discussions with CTC, our consultant, they felt in the preliminary discussions they had with Metronet was in agreement to that. So it may cost us, as the mayor said, anywhere from $7 to $10 million as it stands right now, the dollars. But we would be looking for some money coming back from the provider, not the people signing up, the users, but there would be some mechanism of coming back. And it seems that Metronet is agreeable to that.
Yeah, but to be totally candid on that, I think the possibility would be that they could pass those costs on to the resident, as Bays ET has done, for example, with the polls. My recollection further is that there was unanimity, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, on the part of the council in funding, as I said earlier, at least some of it, if there was an understanding that there would be repayment back to the city. I think that's where we ended it, tentatively on a straw poll basis. But as Councilmember Brost said, it's all going to depend on what we do definitively. Okay, thanks for that additional information. So in addition to all of that, one last thing I want to mention, as you know, we have another large moving part relative to these three things and potentially other things, but we'll just focus on these three at the moment, which is the possibility of federal funding from things that are coming from Washington as part of COVID response and so forth. And I think I saw in your memo, the preliminary projection for the city was 6.5 million. It may have been in your CA's report, but I saw that from you somewhere. And so we have that moving part, but the issue with that is we don't know exactly when, we don't know definitively the exact amount. So our city administrator has new information. Go ahead, City Administrator Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to let you all know that literally I received an email from one of my counterparts in another city. They got some advance notice that Treasury today just came down with guidelines with regards to the ARPA money, the American Recovery Plan Act. And as the mayor just said, right now it identifies the city of Wildwood receiving $6.5 million. Again, that's in 2 tranches. We would receive roughly 50% of that sometime in the near future, and the other 50% 12 months from now. But we just recently I heard today, the treasurer's come down with those guidelines. That money is going to flow to the state first, and then the state has a very, very short time frame to turn that money around. So I haven't seen the guidelines, and the Metro League of St. Louis, I'm sure I'll be seeing an email from Pat Kelly probably tomorrow about that. But we don't know how the state's going to do that, because it's going to go to the state, because we are under 50,000 in population. So we don't get that money directly from Treasury. That has to go to the state in our case, and then will flow to us. But again, very short time frame. So I would expect to see that money within the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, at least half that money. So $3.25 million ought to be being electronically deposited into our account. That's my expectation.
What
Thank
is
you.
your timing expectation
3 weeks, 2 weeks to 3 weeks.
from today?
Yes, sir. That's what I'm hoping.
Okay. In addition to that variable that's floating around, we have another federal variable, which is additional funds that the federal government may be looking to disperse of similar nature, but that is at the moment much less definitive. So all that is to say this. We are at a point in our strategic planning, I think, where decisions need to be made for the final leg of it, that being the financial part. And that's the lay of the land as we sit here this evening relative to the moving parts. And I think the first thing, those moving parts being the number one, that we need to move forward with the goals of the council, and number two, the variable of how we're going to do it. And then other third variable would be the federal funding, potential federal funding. So with all that in mind, I think the seminal issue that the council should decide, I would suggest you decide this evening, is one of timing. Do you want to delay further discussion of the finances of these 3 things until we have more knowledge definitively of the federal component, funding component? Or do you want to move ahead? And when that comes in, if it does, handle that at that point in time. I think that's the first thing we need to do. And I'm asking that because I didn't want to take you down a path with discussions this evening that you may think is either not ripe for discussion, premature, or what have you. So that's what I would ask you to think about, and let's have a discussion. Councilmember Garitano.
Thank you, Mayor. In my opinion, I do think that it just makes sense. We've waited this long for several of these items, and now we're very close to the finish line to be able to see what the big picture looks like in terms of funds that are potentially available to our city. And so I've said this before, and my preference would be that we just wait a little bit until we get those final figures and get a full understanding really of what's the menu in front of us, so that this way we can start to choose based on our priorities. So that's my position on that. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, that's your position. All right, Councilmember Brost.
Yeah, I guess, if I look at the finances of the city and I compare it to maybe my past in operating a business, the city's finances are very predictable. I mean, I would love to have started every year knowing what, the revenue that would just flow in. I mean, it's great. I think every time we meet, there's always going to be another decision pending. We may not be able to make all decisions, but I think if we're actually willing and wanting to make a decision, and I scratch my head and say, does everyone in this room really want to make a decision? Do some people in this room want to continue to defer? Because that's all we've been doing. And it's my opinion that we have sufficient data on the incoming funds. That's, call it that federal money we've been waiting for 10 years. to make a decision. And I think we need to make a decision. And Steve, on the memo with the reserves, it wasn't necessarily what I was thinking about. And I gave that a lot of thought, and I resisted reaching out to you because I was thinking at it as sort of a finance guy and like a stress test on the budget, and truly, what does the city need? Not what the ordinance says, but what does it need? What if we had 12 inches of rain and 4 bridges blew out? And if we go back over the history of the city over the last 25 years, what would we use as a stress test to see what our reserves should be and what they need to be? And the only thing I really thought of was the pandemic. I mean, that's a stress test. If you want to stress test the stock portfolio, I would say go back to 2008 and see how you would do. You wouldn't use the pandemic for that because it recovered right away. So what is that stress test for the city? So, because to me, we need to know what level of reserves we absolutely need and then what reserves we want. Because we have excess reserves that I feel is an injustice to our residents. We're holding on to that money when we have a crisis in internet, and we say here again tonight, let's wait for more information. We have information. With or without that money, I think we can make a decision. It's going to be a tough one. And I just think the city needs to, if there's a way to recover some through billings, my concern is that what we don't want to do is create a situation where 5 years and 6 years from now, we're still trying to figure out how to get internet to the residents of Wildwood. So I'm sorry. I think we have more information that I would have had throughout my career to be able to sit down and make a decision. My gosh, it's all just sitting there. We just need to step up and make a decision. And I'm wondering if the city just doesn't want to make a decision. And I define city as all of us, not. So thank you.
Councilor Dodwell.
Kind of in line with what Mr. Brost had just mentioned. We've been talking about internet forever as a city. What's the timeline for us finishing up a contract with a provider that we kind of sat on for a year due to the pandemic? And I keep seeing memos that kind of go around and around. Well, we're working on it. But CTC should have had something done, in my opinion, months ago, because they had the information in front of them from the vendors. What's their ETA on when they're going to get back to the council so we can make a voting decision? And I don't disagree with you, Mr. Bruce, that let's use some of the reserve. Let's get it finished for the rural internet. And then let's let whatever vendor we're picking go out to all of our residents and say, here's what we can do for you. And they can make some more money doing that as well. I just want to get off this internet bandwagon that we've been on for so long. And it is our number one priority. So I just want to make sure we're moving forward now. I've never seen a process take as long as this process has ever.
One thing I would just mention before we have the city administrator respond to the timing question. There's no doubt that this issue, the internet access issue, has been around for us, for the city, for a long time. As a caveat, or I guess sort of an amendment, I want to use that word, to the discussion of what we've done and haven't done and the time and so forth. I would just ask that we not forget that it is not the case that we have not ever done anything with respect to this issue. We've actually put polls in places and we've,
I concur.
you know, yep, and
I
done some
concur
things.
wholeheartedly with that. I
And
did not
this
mean to
yep, and
be-
this council has made rapid progress just with respect to the strategic planning of this, getting it elevated to an item 1 priority on a strategic plan basis, which has never occurred in the history of the city, to my knowledge. So pat yourselves on the back a little bit that we have done. We're not done yet, but we've made lots of progress. I would argue compared historically with respect to not only this issue but some others. So just to put it in context. So I'm not really disagreeing. I'm just kind of augmenting there. Councilmember, I'm sorry, City Attorney or City Administrator Cross, you wanted to respond to Councilmember Dodwell's question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple things, Councilmember Dodwell, with regards to timing, as I had mentioned earlier, it is my expectation, and I will do everything possible. I will reach out to CTC. I let them go today because the last communication with them was on Thursday. They said they were doing everything they could. And I, again, reminded them that the hope had been to have some information by tonight's council meeting. But I will reach out again to them tomorrow. My expectation is, and a very strong expectation, they can't control Metronet, but I'm hopeful we'll get something this week in terms of a term sheet that will identify the dollars. And as we said earlier, somewhere between $7 and $10 million. And we are being told by CTC, it ought to be at the lower end of that range. Now, but keep in mind, there's two other there were a whole lot of folks that responded to the RFP. And so when we talk about timing, it took a lot of time to narrow that down. That's what the Rural Internet at that time was called, the Rural Internet Access Committee, went through and whittled that down ultimately to the top 3. Now, we just learned in conversations, the conversation between the city attorney and myself, there is a new player in town who is laying fiber like crazy in the St. Charles, St. Peter's area. So Mr. Young asked if he could reach out to them or have one of his associates reach out and talk to them about the city of Wildwood. They said, absolutely, they would like to talk with us. And so I'm expecting a call this week from them to see what they might do and how quickly. So we are, as the mayor said, we've, it's kind of like things move really slow, but then it's just jumped ahead light years in terms of what we've done here in the last month or two, specifically with related to internet. So I think we're getting very, very close. And again, I think this week we should start to hear, especially the term sheet from Metronet, and we can go from there. We might hear about their federal funding more. So I think things are really coming to a head here between now and say the next council meeting. That's my hope anyway.
Thank you. Councilmember Garetano.
Steve, thanks for bringing up this potential other vendor. What I would suggest is this vendor, we want to hear from them, but certainly let them understand that we are already, this is a moving train and they need to catch up quickly if they want to be considered. Otherwise, we're going to lose time. And, my fellow council member from Ward 1 here, I agree with him, that there is decision needs to be made. We have to be committed to making a decision. And I imagine you're frustrated, as many of the residents are, with regards to the internet issues. So I want to make sure I'm clear in my remarks before. As you all heard, we are getting $6.5 million. First half should be coming to us sometime in June. And then the second half will be payable to us in about 12 months from that. So I think once we have that money in hand in a month, we certainly don't want to sit on it. We're not a bank, and our residents would expect us to put it to use, and the folks that pass legislation intend us to use it. And so we want to put it into good work for internet. And I would say, if to get the wheels moving, if there is no regrets type of work that we could pull the trigger on and get moving quickly and spend money to get work done as far as internet, the #1 priority, which I strongly support, then I would say, yeah, let's start to do that. There is that other bucket of work that will be provided to the state for infrastructure type of work. I suspect that's going to take longer for us to get that because the session will be ending in about a week or so. I do not expect them to make any decisions on that. And so, if we're going to wait for that, that might be a bit longer. And, I know Larry probably wouldn't want to wait till then, but again, if there's no regrets type of decisions that can be made now, maybe there's a phase one, potentially that's what we get moving on, knowing that we're getting that first half of the 6.5 million coming next June, this coming June. I certainly wouldn't make that decision until we see it, because we know sometimes things could get hung up and unexpectedly, just like we were waiting on those guidelines from Treasury.
So one thing, just to tag on to Councilmember Garitano and Councilmember Brost's comments, this is just an idea I'm going to throw out. The council could, and I'm just going to put this out there hypothetically. Council could say, it could pass a motion, in other words, that internet access will be funded up to X in the following order of priority. And I'm just going to throw these out. Federal funding, number one, moving things from one budget line item to another, i.e. internet access, a bond issuance, or any combination of those things. And the motion could read that in the event the first, the federal funding, if that's hypothetically part of the motion, fails, in other words, we don't get it, or we don't get it on a timely basis, then whatever amount was going to be funded by federal funding is just the remaining options are increased to that degree, so that it is conditioned on a tiered basis with respect to the funding of it. Everyone understand what I'm explaining there? Yep, and I've got Councilmember Jaxie on the list here. I've got you, Rob. Hold on just one second. So that's just an idea I'm throwing out as a possibility to get things moving and to give flexibility to the council. And it may be fluid for a while, and we have to come back and revisit it. But as a practical matter, let's just say hypothetically that the decision is made to, alter things in the budget or to do a bond issuance. It's going to take time for the city administrator and the city attorney to come back to the council with follow through on those directives as to, okay, here are your next steps to do that. And we're going to have things in the strategic plan that coordinate those. But there will be other decisions a council need to make in terms of meat on the bones, if you will, relative to probably about any source of this funding, because it's a big number. That's just an idea. Okay, now, Councilmember Jaxie, thank you for your patience. You're on the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I have a couple of questions. Maybe the first one for you, sir, based on what you just said. You listed federal funding, maybe a line item change and possibly a bond issue. Would it also be possible that we decide to spend some of the reserve funds and make as part of the resolution that if the federal funding comes through, or when the federal funding comes through, that it replaces the funding in the reserves that maybe we spend?
You could absolutely make that as part of the motion.
Okay, the next
I'd want
question.
I'm sorry, Councilor Jaxie, one caveat to that. I may have been a little strong on my answer. I'd want to go back and look at the resolution or ordinance of the council that created those reserves to just make sure we're not running afoul of anything there. Subject to that, I think you can do what you want to do, but I think we want to make sure that we close the loop on that before that would ever make its way into a motion the council passes when it's dealing with reserves.
Okay.
Because my recollection is there was a very specific ordinance or resolution that was passed relative to those reserves and maybe what they're to be used for. And not to say the council can't revisit that, but it would need to be revisited under a motion to reconsider context, I think, rather than passing a conflicting ordinance or resolution. But hold on just one second.
I know
you have a
that-
point of information?
Point of information, there is I believe 25% of the operating budget is supposed to be dedicated to a specific operating reserve. I know that for sure, but there might be others that we need to research.
Okay. Go ahead, Councilmember Jaxie. Thank you for your patience again.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. So the two other questions I have, possibly both for Administrator Cross. Is there anything that we have to do specifically to justify that those federal dollars? In other words, do we, like with our road construction, et cetera, where we have to prove what it is we're doing, et cetera, when we request the monies, or is that 6.5 that I've heard Councilmember Garitano also mention? I mean, is that a foregone conclusion and we have to give the federal government nothing else to justify getting those dollars? And then the second part of the question is, well, I'm sorry, actually I already got the answer to the other question. So just that, I guess.
City Administrator Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Jaxie, with regards to the $6.5 million, and that is unless something were to change, but that number has been the number that is scheduled to be allocated to the city of Wildwood. There has been a list for each of the cities by state. And so I don't anticipate that number changing at all. So let's say it's $6.5 million. The requirements and the types of expenditures that a municipality can use that money for is far and away broader than it was, say, a year ago or so when we received the $2.4 million in CARES money. You may recall at that time it had to be on public safety and so forth. So it was very, very specific what we could spend it on. This 6.5, I mean, it can be for broadband, and that is a category that's actually called out, and it can be for watershed and for erosion and for lots of infrastructure. So number one, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of requirements in terms of what it can be spent on. Ultimately, depending on what the state wants, and there's discussions about that in terms of the state wanting reports back about what's being spent on, and there's several people, there's camps that are fighting that. I don't think I've not seen any guidelines, but again, Treasury just today came out with certain guidelines in terms of if the federal were looking for reporting, but the fact that the money is not coming directly to us from the federal government to us because our population's under 50,000, any reporting requirements are of substantiation of our expenditures would go to the state, and that has yet to be determined.
Okay, thank you.
Any follow-up, Councilmember Jaxie?
No, that's
Councilor
good.
Galani,
Thank you.
did I see your hand and miss calling on you? If I did, my apology. Okay, Councilman, I looked over and had that memory there. Councilmember Galani, thank you for your patience. Go ahead. Is your microphone on?
Sorry. I think this is like a two-part thing here. I feel like right now we're working on a strategic plan, which is something that should be irregardless of things that we may be getting or might be coming down the pipe or numbers that we might not be aware of. I think the conversation we started with, when we prioritize all of these things, internet being at the top of the list and watershed and all this. And so we know that these are priorities. So, I think the conversation that we've been having is how do we want to allocate how that fits into the budget? Is the city going to pay for it? Are the residents going to pay for it? Is there going to be a hybrid in between? And I think we should move forward with making that decision on how we want to approach that with internet and with watershed. And then once we've come up with that, allocation or decision on how we're doing that, knowing that we're moving forward, then as we get these monies in hand that may or may not materialize, it seems like the 6.5 is a seemingly more certain dollar amount. But once again, I'm kind of the opinion that until it's in our hands, it's not ours. But once we get that money, if we get that 6.5 million, and then we decide that we're willing to take 4 million out of the reserve account, let's say, so now we've got a net $10.5 million in our hands that we want to pledge towards different projects, then we can have another conversation to say, out of this 10.5 million, let's put 4.5 towards internet. Let's put 4 towards watershed, or whatever breakdown that ends up being to allocate those monies that we have that we're willing to spend. And it's all going to go towards the taxpayers and the residents in those different projects. And then whatever we've decided already previously, as far as how that's going to be paid for, that just gets diminished by that amount that we've pledged to that project. So whether it's a bond issue, whether it's the residents paying back a certain amount of that bill over time, or what have you, that total number that needs to be pledged to that project just gets diminished by whatever money the city received from federal funding that we're willing to put towards that project. I guess, I don't mean to sound confusing, but I'm just trying to.
It can
Probably
be
did.
confusing. That's okay. Okay, council members, we're right at the 7 o'clock meeting. One more, Councilmember Clark, and then I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna throw something out as an idea to get us moving ahead on this for our next meeting. Councilmember Clark.
Well, maybe you have a new idea, but I would move that we go ahead and kick this off and oh dear. And we go with the suggestions that the mayor had a few minutes ago. Can you repeat that for me?
So it would be a conditional approach to the funding of whatever project or projects, tiered, and I just threw it out hypothetically as an option. First from federal funding, and if that isn't from erosion, or I'm sorry, from budget changes or from reserves, or again, waiting, we need to get more data on that. You could also do it in the reverse, which is fund it. And then to tag on to what Councilmember Galani just said, I think I understood him saying was, and if it's, you know, we're going to do a bond issuance or we're going to move things around. And if the money comes in, then we're going to replenish the reserves. We're going to pay off the bonds or what have you. So you could do it either one of those ways.
And that is the way I wanted to make the motion to fund it and then recoup the later.
Okay. With the ideas for doing that to come from someone at the next meeting. Specific ideas, because we're right now we're getting our concept done. Okay, so the motion is to, as I understand it, to not wait until funding comes from the federal source, to just do our best to move forward and with replenishment if those funds do come. Okay, is there a second? Second by Councilmember Bros. Well, we got to get a second first. Okay, and now you can amend.
In fewer words, I'd like to say is that, the motion would be is that we take 3.5 million from the incoming federal money and 3.5 million from reserves to fund internet, with the balance to be made up with budget items over the next 5 to 10 years. That's it. We're done. If the money, I mean, we could say that next year we may not get sales tax revenue either. I mean, this is a fairly certain item. I mean, I would love to be a business owner and have, $3.5 million that I know is coming in a few weeks. I mean,
So
it's
the
a lot of
only
money.
caveat to that would be what I mentioned earlier about the ordinances relating to the reserve specifically, just wanting to. which you could-
Subject to following all our ordinances, but
Okay.
it's just take 3.5 from there, 3.5 from the reserves, make up the difference in line items. And yes, we want to follow all our ordinances.
Okay.
And I've
Is there a
checked it.
second to the amendment? Seconded by Councilmember Bertolino. So discussion is on the amendment. If that passes, it will become the main motion. And then we'll go back and vote on the main motion. Councilmember Edens.
Yeah, Larry, can you clarify for me, does your amendment include recouping costs perhaps from line usage fees or no?
I would say no, because I don't want this to take 5 years. It's time to get it done, and we can afford it.
Right,
Our
but
taxpayers are being damaged every single day.
what I'm asking about is recouping in the
No.
future, not outlaying in the front. So I'm fine with the 3 million going directly to if we have to spend extra. I just wanted to, so your motion does not include a mechanism for
No,
recouping.
if Steve and the city team gets into the term sheet and getting into all the weeds, and if they figure out a way to do that, but that would be coming back with some really good news for us. I think we just need to step up and make a decision. And I mean, we have so much information on this that it's just frustrating that we don't move forward.
So we have a motion and a second. Councilor McCutcheon. I'm sorry, amendment to the motion, and it's been seconded.
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Edens. I think we should have a way of recouping that cost. That's what we did with the internet poles, maybe through user fees. And I'm a little leery of spending money before we actually have it in hand. So we don't know for sure that we're going to have the $6.5 million. It's 3 weeks away. And I think it's more fiscally responsible to wait to see if we're going to have that funding before we actually spend it.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, Councilmember Garetano.
My question, I like the motion, I like the spirit of it, but making the motion here, are we then officially making the decision then that that's what's going to happen? We're going to take 3.5 from,
Yep.
and 3.5 from the
Yes.
reserve. I
Yes.
don't know what the impact, what the reserve looks like to see what's the final number. What does the reserve have today? What will it have after we pull that money out? And do we need that information? I would think that's more of a budgeting type of.
Okay.
What's that? I'm sorry, what was the answer?
Okay, a couple things. First of
I
all,
just want
if-
to, we're going to have to make a decision here. If you could just be really quick, because
it's gonna be real fast. Number one, if the $6.5 million, okay, the half that we're gonna get now is 3.25, not 3.5, 3.25. Secondly, there is a memo that was part of the for information that Councilmember Brost alluded to earlier, that it was an analysis of the reserves. So if you look in your packet, there is there, and it shows that there is over $13 million in excess of what our ordinance call for, which is 25% of our operating expenditures each and every year. So one could look at that and say we have over $13 million of so-called excess reserves, and that is spelled out, and you'll see that in a memorandum in your packet.
Okay, so
Thank you, Mr.
I want to make sure I get this clear. Is the amendment 3.25 or is it 3.5?
Is there any objection, since it's within the possession of the council, to changing 3.5 to 3.25 in the main motion? I'm sorry, in the amendment to the main motion.
Okay.
Seeing no objection, it'll be 3.25.
Second question then, is there anything in the motion or the amendment that says then what happens when we get the second payment from the federal government, the other 3.25? Is that to replenish what's going to be taken out of
No.
the reserve?
No, not part of the motion.
Okay, so that could be done separately in the future if that's the council's desire? Okay, thank you.
All in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
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 Any opposed to the amendment? The amendment carries. I'm sorry, any abstentions? Councilmember Edens abstains. Any other abstentions? Motion carries. That is the main motion. Now vote on the main motion, and let's please repeat the motion, which is 3.25 from federal funding for internet access, 3.25 from federal funding, what from reserves, subject to making sure we can do it legally. What was the number?
Would have been 3.5, but whether it's, if we want to, that's fine with me. I mean, because we still have the budget, and we can still work within line items.
So we can't, unless we reconsider, we got to.
Okay, 3.5 is
It was
what-
3.5 from the
Yeah.
reserves, and then you had another variable in the motion.
The balance of the cost to be worked out within the budget.
Okay, through reallocation. All right, that's the main motion that was just passed as part of the amendment. Councilmember Galani.
Does that, I know Councilmember Edens asked if it was part of the amendment, which it wasn't, but if we pass this, does it allow us to still figure out a way to recoup some of the costs of the total costs of the project via line charges or whatever it is? Like by passing this amendment, we're not saying that the city cannot recoup that. We can still figure that out.
That would need to be a separate motion passed at some point by the council, or a motion to reconsider this one if this one isn't amended to that effect. That's not part of his motion. Council, that would need to be a separate motion from the council to achieve that, or an amendment to this motion, or a reconsideration of this motion if it passes.
I would say to make the amendment I would like to have the ability for the city not to be on the hook for, I don't have a problem moving forward with the project and allocating funds, but I think the city should have the ability to, I mean, I don't believe the city should shoulder 100% of the cost of the project.
Recoup all or some?
Some.
What amount?
I don't know what the total cost is going to be.
You can do it as a percentage. You got to have your mic on, Larry. Sorry.
Yeah, if I understand, it was that we want to have the flexibility in negotiating the final term sheet. We don't want to remove that possibility, and I'm fine with that.
So hearing that, is it acceptable to the council, and this will need to be a unanimous consent, that if the main motion passes, it will be with the understanding that and I'm going to just throw this out if you disagree with this language, to the extent that it is possible to recoup all or some of the funding through resident service, that be considered as part of this motion. Is that okay with you? Okay. Is there any objection to that being included in the motion? City, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just need to clarify. On this term sheet that Joe Vunich, city attorney, and myself went through, initially, when we had words in there to the effect that there would be some amount of money flowing back from the provider, let's call it Metronet, to the city. And Metronet's initial response was, that's a deal breaker, not happening. We said we have to have that happen in some form or fashion. So then in conversation between CTC and Metronet, they said, okay, we can do something. So I would just, all I'm doing is cautioning,
so
if you
this
don't
motion
build
is-
something in real.
This
time.
motion is consistent with that. It says, to the extent it is possible to do that it be examined as part of this motion. It doesn't say mandated, doesn't say.
And it would come from Metronet. There's no money that will flow to the city from the residents at all. That all will, those monies will go to the provider. The provider then.
But they can charge it as a.
They can do whatever they want, but the money will not come from the residents to the city.
Right.
It will come through.
Indirectly.
You want to call it what, but it'll come from the provider if we
I
can.
think we're all
negotiate
saying
that.
the same.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that information. Is there any objection again to that proviso being part of this motion? And you have that for the minutes, is that correct? Okay. Is there any objection from any member of the council? That we collect all or some depending on the availability and potential for doing that? Okay. All in favor of the main motion as amended and agreed upon, please say aye. I'm
Mayor,
sorry.
I had my hand up first. I'm sorry.
Councilor Bartoni.
I had my hand up. I'm sorry. I didn't.
Oh,
I
that's
thought-
okay. My apology for missing you. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's, and I kind of like what Councilmember Galani said. I mean, I'd like to see the city get back the money put back into our reserves. We can figure out how to do that. But we're going to use 3.25 from federal, 3.5 from reserves, and then the balance we're going to figure out of our budget, correct?
Correct, with recoupment of the reserves from any additional federal funding. No, okay.
Okay, but-
Then with the only, just one second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Then the only other proviso, so strike that. The only other proviso is that to the extent recoupment can occur from pass-through fees or whatever from the provider to residents.
Okay, my question on the budget part though is, are we talking about 2021 budget items or 22, 25? What are we, where, and like, we don't know how much, we don't know that final cost yet, so we don't know how much we're going to be pulling out of our budget, correct?
That could be, the answer to your question is that could begin as early as the mid-year review of the budget by the council and would inevitably continue probably on through to the 2022 budget.
But we don't have that final cost yet, correct?
Final cost of what?
The internet, this project. This internet project.
We're estimating, this may have been before you got on Zoom, when we had a discussion early in the work session, the city administrator estimates the total cost will be somewhere between 7 to 10 million.
Okay, so even if it's 7, that's $250,000. Our budgets are awfully tight, and God forbid it be coming up finding another $3.2 million within our budget. I mean, we just don't have those types of, funny money, so to speak, just laying out there that we can just say, oh yeah, well, we'll pull this project. We weren't serious about it. So, I mean, that's a lot of money. I hope everybody realizes that that's not going to be easy to find that balance within our existing budget. I mean, we are very lean the way it is now.
Sorry. Councilmember Bros. Okay, I tell you what, we're getting lots of hands. We got to just
I was just
recess
gonna,
this and go to our
just
main
real
meeting.
quick, it
So-
was just, part of the discussions I think we've had with these suppliers is payment over upwards of 10 years. So we're not, when I'm talking of the balance of it coming from the budget, my perspective is consistent with, I think, what we've all seen. And that is a funding of it over a 10-year period.
Okay, yeah, and the city administrator was going to make the same point. Councilmember Clark? Okay, everyone's going to make the same point. So Councilmember Bartoni, did you hear that from the multiple sources? It's over time, not all at once, okay? Councilmember Garetano.
All right. My question for the city administrator is this going to help you with your negotiations? Because obviously they will be aware of what we approved tonight. And so they may take this as we're setting the limit to this amount. Or do you see any issue with your negotiation? I'm trying to understand how we don't have a figure and we're trying to prove a number.
I would say that ship doesn't sail until we sign a contract.
Right. So the short answer to your question is no, I don't see it as a factor. Again, we're looking at a range anywhere from 7 to 10. They said 10. We believe we can get them down lower than that. We've heard a number as low as maybe 7.7. So somewhere in that range. So I don't think that the discussions we're having now will hurt that. But as the mayor just said, at the end of the day, we'll see what the terms are on the term sheet, and then we have some more negotiating to do.
So anticipate you may come back to the council seeking more than what we've authorized tonight.
I don't think so.
What tonight is 3.25 and 3.5.
Well, okay, but that's just this year and so forth. But again, the term right now is 10 million. Right now, the term sheet says $10 million payable over 10 years.
Got it. Okay.
So we can negotiate all of that still.
Understood then.
Thank you. Councilmember Edens.
Okay, last question for clarification. I was pretty sure in the motion it said rural internet, and the reason why I want to clarify is because I'm fine with a check for everything for all of rural internet right now. Where I've had my hang up, and I understand economies of scales, is that in the bid proposals, it included providing internet at a subsidized cost for all Wildwood residents. So I'm not comfortable with a motion that says I'm willing to pay millions of dollars for parts of my ward that are served, but I want to fund the ones that are underserved. So if the motion is for a full contract that I don't have in front of me, that is to subsidize the entire city, I'm not okay with that. So does this motion have rural? No, it has internet period. So, oh, okay.
Just one second. City administrator Cross.
Let's leave it at $10 million, which is the number that's on the table right now. That is to put internet in the entire city. The unserved, the underserved, rural areas, if you want to call it, west of 109, east of 109, with this particular provider we've been talking about, Metronet, it is internet throughout the whole city. The way they slice and dice it is that money is to put the internet and the whole structure west of 109. Anything east of 109 throughout the rest of Wildwood is on their dime. And they will pay.
Yeah, and in essence, from just saying it practically speaking, I think we've had issues getting anyone interested in just that part.
Say that again. You said it was on their dime for expansion to the whole city. I thought that was included in the proposal, that it was subsidizing the entire city.
What I was saying is that let's leave the $10 million number that we've been kicking around is for them to put in the entire structure to provide internet west of 109. Let's call it the rural areas of Wildwood. All the rest of Wildwood, they will put in that, they will lay the fiber on their dime. It will not cost us. They will do all of that. They will then be able to offer competitive service, a gig up, a gig down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they will lay all that fiber at their cost. They just, and then people can sign up. So the money is basically west of 109.
Okay, because that was different than the original discussion. That's a really important distinction, because when we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago, that was not the case.
No, I think we've been consistent. That's the way it's been proposed from day one in their RFP.
Councilor McCutcheon.
Underserved, what's the definition of underserved? All right. So when you say underserved, what's the definition of underserved?
I'll defer to others, but I would say those who don't have it, those who have it at an extremely high cost without getting much in terms of download speeds or upload speeds for it.
And then my other question is, I don't think overtime was in the motion. Will you restate the motion?
Can you restate the motion, please?
I didn't have it listed. So I have the motion is funding for internet with $3.25 million coming from federal funds, 3.5 million from reserves, with the difference being made up in budget line items following city code and ordinances. And then the consensus that was just mentioned, to the extent it's possible to recoup some or all funding from the fee from.
I think the motion, since it is referring to internet access, is it's implied that it's over time. It's not an immediate expenditure, but if there's no objection from the council, we can have that as a proviso with an understanding. Any objection to that? Okay, so now it's part of the motion.
Councilmember McCutcheon, as far as underserved, there's a specific definition of what that means. I don't remember the exact number, but CTC told us it's something, and again, this is not the exact number, but if the download speeds are less than 1 megabyte or 2.5 megabytes, but there's a specific definition that is used in the internet world about what underserved means.
Yeah, what my concern is that we're saying internet service to service all of Wildwood, not just the rural area of Wildwood. And so I think that depends on what the definition of underserved is.
So the motion is for internet access, period. It includes underserved and those currently served, because the deal would be for economies of scale, the provider would be doing all of the above. Any other discussion? Seeing no further discussion, and we've had the motion recited. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. With that, it's amazing what happens when you have to do it at the last minute, isn't it? With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the work session so we can move into the main meeting. And before I do that, actually, I want to say one thing. So the process that we just went through relative to internet access on the finances, please be prepared to do that on Watershed and Lake Chesterfield at the next meeting. And I'm going to look to you, Councilmember Brost, as a person for the motion on how to resolve this. All right, just kidding. Okay, now with that in mind, just so you're aware of what we'll be doing at the next meeting, and thank you, another night of rapid progress. Motion to adjourn made by Councilmember, yes, and congratulations, Councilmember Rose. Motion was made to adjourn by Councilmember Dodwell. Is there a second to the motion? Made by Councilmember Farmer. It's non-debatable. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Sorry, any opposed? Any abstentions? Since we just had a break between the last part of our breakup in the work session or interlude in a work session, is there any objection? Okay, we'll take, if you can, let's please keep it to a 3-minute break because we're already late and we're going to start the main meeting of the council. We are adjourned from the work session. All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the city council meeting for the city of Wildwood for Monday, May the 10th, 2021. Ms. Edens, would you please call the, or I'm sorry, Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Boland,
Here?
Councilmember Galani. Councilmember Hopper. Councilmember Jaxi,
Here.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Here.
Councilmember Edens. Here. Councilmember Brost,
Here.
Councilmember Garitano,
Present.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo, Councilmember McCutcheon,
Here.
Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember Nyan, Councilmember Bartoni,
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
All right, welcome, everyone, and my apology that we're starting a little late. We accomplished a lot in the work session, in case you weren't watching that, and so it threw us behind just a few minutes. And I appreciate your patience, particularly for those of our residents who may be watching. If you'd please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance to the extent you are comfortably able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Moving next to the minutes and approval of those minutes from the council's April 26, 2021 work session and regular meeting. I hope you've all had a chance to review those. If you have any comments or corrections, suggested corrections, we can take those now. If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Made by Councilmember Edens. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Brost. Any discussion on the motion? See no discussion on the motion. Please say, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Councilmember Nyan abstains. Any other abstentions? All right, moving next into public participation. Do we have any speaker cards this evening?
I have not received any speaker cards.
Has anyone raised their hand on Zoom? Okay, so I'm assuming we don't have any speakers, so I won't need to read about that. Moving next into mayor's appointments and announcements. We have one appointment this evening. It's a real honor for me to make former council member Larry McGowan, who's with us. Larry, would you come forward, please? So as you know, Steve Cross, our city administrator, has served the city for many years in the capacity of city treasurer, and we appreciate his service. And we appreciated it so much so that he was moved to the city administrator's position. And under our rules, he can't do both, not that he would want to. And so that opened the city treasurer spot. And that spot needs to be a Wildwood resident and ideally someone with an accounting background. And if you can nail both of those and get someone who's also been on the council where all of you have sat and seen and you know all the financial statements and the reporting and the auditing and has done that both in private sector as well as have the perspective from sitting at this bench doing it, I think we call that a home run. So with that, you have my memo, and I appreciate you being here. Larry, I would entertain, if there are any questions, we can ask Larry. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to approve the appointment as presented, made by Councilmember Brost, seconded by Councilmember Clark. And is there any discussion on the motion? Before the vote, Larry, would you like to say anything?
I'm just glad to be able to help the city again. At least I hope will be of some help. I did have a nice preliminary conversation with City Administrator Cross and with Dawn Kaiser to learn a little bit more about the sort of the logistics, the mechanics of how they have handled this position and its responsibilities in the past. Once I had that discussion, that was really what sort of convinced me that it was something that I would be able to help out with.
Excellent. Councilmember Bartoni.
Mayor Bowen, I kind of agree with you. I think you just hit a home run on this. I don't think that you could have found a more qualified or a better candidate. And it's Having served on council with Larry, he brings a lot of value to everything he does, and it's going to be awesome and just great for the city to have Larry back working with us. So welcome back, Larry. Glad to have you.
Thanks, Don.
Councilmember Edens.
Glad to have you back. So we got the Larrys back in action. So I expect every appointment now to have double up on names because we've got the Joes and the Larrys. So thanks for coming back and serving. We appreciate it.
Councilmember Rambo. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I see a hand? Microphone.
This is a home run. Thanks.
Excellent. Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yeah, ditto to what Don said and to what Miss Evans said. Yeah, you were awesome on council, very detailed. You really thought things through before you made a judgment of any sort. So I'm thrilled that you're gonna serve the city again.
Thank you.
Councilmember Garetano.
Yes, I have to say a privilege of serving with Larry. And Larry's one of those people that I looked up for as far as someone who was firm, very reasoned, very methodological with his, research. So I have full trust in Larry in serving our city as treasurer, given his long history of experience. Welcome back, Larry.
So I'm going to give all of you a little inside scoop. The real credit actually goes to our city administrator, Steve Cross. Because Steve reached out to me and said, what are you going to do about the city treasurer position? And I said, well, we've got some options and I'm looking at those. And he said, well, what are your thoughts on former council member Larry McGowan? And I said, well, if we could get him to do it, for sure. Well, Steve Cross said about getting him to do it. So there you go. And that's just excellent. So actually, I don't want to take the credit for, of course, make the appointment, but I don't want to take the real credit for it because it does go to the person who put in the legwork. And I had just foreclosed that I didn't think we stood a chance, but I'm glad we did. And here we are tonight. So thank you so much, Larry, for being willing to step up. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Treasurer McGowan, congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you again for being here. We appreciate it. All right, welcome to the team. Moving back to the team. I'm sorry. Okay, City Administrator Cross.
Larry, I forgot to mention that whenever the mayor releases me from the city administrator gig, whenever that is, I want my old job back. Okay. Somewhere down the road, I may be 80 at the time, but I still.
Steve, that wasn't part of the deal.
I see. I thought I'd give it a shot.
All right, moving into legislation. Second readings, Bill 2598 is before the council for final passage. It concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Brost. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2598.
2598, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, submitting to the qualified voters of the city at the general municipal election to be held in the city on April 5th, 2022. The proposed amendment to subsection A of section 3.8 of the charter of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, as it relates to regular meetings of the city council.
Okay, and we do have an amendment to this that changed the time from 6:30 to 7. So procedurally, do we need to vote on that first, or is that included?
The amendment needs to be made as a vote motion. Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we have the motion, or I'm sorry, the recommendation from admin PW to change the meeting time. So we still have the flexibility, which was my whole request. So we need an approval to change the time from 6:30 to 7. Does someone want to make that motion to amend? We have a Councilmember Rambo, second by Councilmember Dodwell. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Sorry about that. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So the bill has been amended accordingly. Is there any discussion on the bill? Councilor Edens.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about what we said as I knocked the table over, Public Works, and a little bit of the mental gymnastics I went through kind of on my thought process with this. So the first, I want to talk about the pros of voting for this first. So as John Young said, several times now. We're one of the only cities that has a time codified that is not flexible. People say, so what? Well, we've seen extremes. We saw extremes in Texas. What happens when the ice ruins your building? There's no electric in the entire city. And if we had to have emergency authorization for any funds or anything like that, you'd be outside in the dark, standing and having a meeting because there'd be no place to have it. Whereas you could have it in the daylight if you could, let's say, move the time. So that's a good reason to vote for it. When I had hangups and kind of the mental reasoning I went through was I really didn't want to see the time changed except for emergencies, which is why I fought to amend it from 6:30 to 7 to signal to the public that it wasn't going to change. And then in admin and public works, we had a conversation really about seeing this as a pair of legislation. So an ordinance, which is 2618 that's on the agenda, with this as a charter amendment. So the thought was that if another future council came in and said, we want to change the time to 6:30, which if you say, what's the big deal? It's because it moves the work session up and then people sign up for a job expecting a certain time and it can be hard to make those meetings. I think what we're doing now is an exception for a 5-year plan. That I didn't want to see it happen. So what we built in was a protection that if council times creeped up, that you would have the ability to participate remotely, which is how I swallowed voting for this out of committee. My hang up tonight is kind of the order of operations. So this is a second reading for final approval to put it, in front of the voters. But we've got a first reading on 2618. So if council tears up and just hates the policy for virtual attendance, then I go back to being concerned about the council meeting time being moved up in the future. So that's why I'm probably going to abstain tonight. Now, does that mean that when it comes up, on a charter amendment in front of me on the ballot that I won't vote for it? No, that doesn't necessarily mean that. I just wanted to kind of go through my mental process. If this doesn't get passed together, I'm not okay with it.
You could make a motion to, if this passes, you could make a motion to reconsider it later in the meeting.
That's true. That's true. Okay, let me stew on that a little bit, because that would still be a first reading tonight unless somebody wanted to make a motion for a second. So I wouldn't necessarily have.
We could also do a second reading on the policy you're talking about.
Okay, all right, I'll stew on that. That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, seeing no further discussion on the main motion as amended, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2598 as amended.
Councilmember Jaxi,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
I think it's going to get messy, so I'm going to abstain.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo, Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember Hopper.
Okay, the bill has passed as amended. Moving next to Bill 2610, it's before the council for final passage as well, and it concerns Ward 8. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Galani, seconded by Councilmember Garitano. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2610.
Bill 2610, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the adjustment of a certain boundary line between two legal lots of record that are known as adjusted lots 2 and 3 of Stricker subdivision, with said being more specifically located in the northwest quadrant of the Manchester Road and Etherton Road intersection, and will thereby modify them to address an encroachment issue that currently exists upon these properties, all to be known hereafter as boundary adjustment of adjusted lots 2 and 3 of Stricker subdivision. Second reading.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything further to add to the information that the council's been provided relative to Bill 2610?
Mr. Mayor, the bill has not changed since its introduction. Mr. Jacquin is showing you the area of the adjustment, the orange line, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for, thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe or any comments on Bill 2610? Seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of the bill.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo, Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Nian,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani, Councilmember Hopper, Councilmember Jaxi.
Yes.
Thank you. The bill
Yes.
has passed. The bill has passed. Moving next to Bill 2612 is before the council for final passage, and it concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Garitano. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2612.
An ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute a city contractor agreement on behalf of the city of Wildwood, Missouri with Shawnee Mission Tree Service Incorporated, doing business as Arbor Masters Tree and Landscape for the treatment of ash trees located within the public right-of-way to prevent infestation by the emerald ash borer pest, including other incidental items as shown on the project specifications and documents. Second reading.
Thank you. Rick, do you have anything further that you want to mention relative to Bill 2612?
I do not, Mr. Mayor, but again, I'm available for any questions from the city council.
Okay, any questions for Rick? Rick, I noticed this is for all wards. Do we have those trees in the rural areas as well? I've only heard conversation about this in the more town center focused area. Are they throughout our city? Is that the reason for that?
They are present pretty much in every ward. They're more heavily in some than others.
Okay, just wanted to know. All right, educated me there. Thank you. All right, any further questions or comments? Seeing no further questions or discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2612.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Nian,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember Hopper, Councilmember Jaxi,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes. Okay, the bill has passed. Moving next to Bill 2614, it is before the council for final passage, the last of our second readings, and it concerns Ward 5. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Bertolino, seconded by Councilmember McCutcheon. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2614.
Bill 2614, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the city's acceptance for use and maintenance 2 easement areas for the installation of a T turnaround and required retaining walls, which totals 0.10 acre, all to be located at the terminus of Birch Forest Drive, which will then alleviate certain public safety concerns regarding the current and temporary nature of the station of the city street, with said accommodations being granted by the homeowners association of the villages at Bright Leaf subdivision and a private property owner. Second reading.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything further, or Rick, that you want to mention relative to Bill 2614?
Well, Mr. Mayor, with Mr. Brown's permission and acknowledgement to Mr. Jacquin, again, here is the area of interest. The larger pink easement is on common ground at the villages at Brightleaf, and the smaller triangular easement is on the private property. That property is owned by Mr. Kimner, and Mr. Kimner has agreed to grant the easement. With that, the the bill is ready for final passage to become an ordinance. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Joe? Any discussion on the bill? Seeing no discussion or questions, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2614.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yeah.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember Hopper, Councilmember Jaxi,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Thank you. The bill passes. Moving next into first readings, Bill 2615 is before the council for first reading and it concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? We have a Councilmember Garitano, seconded by Councilmember Brost. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2615.
Bill 2615, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the purchase of one Chevrolet Colorado 2021 Chevrolet Colorado four-wheel drive crew cab pickup truck from Don Brown Chevrolet Incorporated through the state of Missouri Cooperative Procurement Program. First reading.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, anything you want to mention relative to this?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually, I'm going to defer to Mr. Brown, but I do believe, and I think, Mr. Brown, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that this was actually a 2022 vehicle versus a 2021. I think I heard you say, if you could clarify that and then speak to this one, please. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor and City Administrator Cross, this is to purchase a new public works vehicle. Actually the plan is eventually to replace a public works vehicle with a new pickup truck. It is a 2022 model. They're telling me that's what is available at this point in the year. And we did budget for this purchase. The original vehicle is a 2010 model, so it has some use and is in need of a replacement at this point in time. So I'm available for any questions from the council about this purchase.
Okay, so we're going to need, when this comes back for second reading, to have an amendment for 2022.
Do you want me to reread it with the correct year?
Well, the problem is that the writing of it is 2021. I think so. I think the better course would be to amend it at the next meeting to 2022. But thank you for offering, City Clerk Eldridge. Councilor Garitano.
Nope, that's all I was going to say. We need to
Okay,
amend it.
yeah. So we got to do it right. So just be prepared. If we could have an amendment in place for the next meeting, so that can be done. Any questions for Steve or Rick, or any comments? Councilmember Clark.
Yeah, this is a smaller, quite a bit smaller truck than we had that we're replacing. But my question is, does this price that we're talking about include the plow and the spreader and the accessories and labor to put that on? And will that be within the budget?
I don't think it does, but City Administrator Cross. I'm sorry, Rick.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it does not include a potential future purchase of a plow or a spreader, but we will still have some money available within that $35,000 that's been budgeted for that purpose.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. So it'll be on the council's meeting agenda for its next meeting. Moving next to Bill 2616. It's before the council for first reading and it concerns Ward 1. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? We have a Councilmember Brost, Ward 1. Seconded by Councilmember Clark. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2616.
Bill 2616, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, approving the adjustment of certain common boundary lines between three existing parcels of ground known as a tract of land, being part of all of adjusted lots 8 and 16 of the boundary adjustment plat of lots 8 and 16 in common ground area of the Wild Horse Spring Farm subdivision, Plat 4, recorded in Book 360, page 152, situated within U.S. Survey 1956, Township 45 North, Range 3 East, City of Wildwood, St. Louis County, Missouri, and more specifically located at the west side of Larimore Valley Drive, south of Wild Horse Creek Road, for the purposes of reconfiguring their common boundary lines to eliminate errors in the recording associated with a similar division in 2012. First reading.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything you would like to mention relative to Bill 2616?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, very briefly, and again, my acknowledgement to Mr. Jacqueline for helping. This is the tract of land that is the subject of the boundary adjustment plat request. And as you can see, there are 3 parcels of ground, one of which is landlocked. This landlocked parcel of ground was created in 2012. How did that get created? Well, we're all not infallible, and in this case, St. Louis County didn't read the plat correctly. The property owner has been paying taxes on a phantom piece of ground. Therefore, the property owner, Mr. Scott, is respectfully requesting a second reading tonight so this matter can be addressed and that the actual parcel of ground will be a single tract of land in the future.
Okay, any questions for Joe? Does someone want to make a motion for second reading this evening? Maybe Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember Brost. As you may know this, will probably know this, we'll take a 2/3 vote to do a second reading at the same meeting. We'll do that by voice vote and see how far we get. And if that doesn't work, we'll do something different. All in favor of the motion for second reading, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So we have 2/3. Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2616 a second time.
Bill 2616, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, approving an adjustment of certain common boundary lines between 3 existing parcels of ground known as a tract of land being part of all of adjusted lots 8 and 16 of the boundary adjustment plat of lots 8 and 16 in common ground area of the Wild Horse Spring Farm subdivision, Plat 4, recorded in Book 360, page 152, situated within U.S. Survey 1956, Township 45 North, Range 3 East, City of Wildwood, St. Louis County, Missouri, and more specifically located at the west side of Larimore Valley Drive, south of Wild Horse Creek Road, for the purposes of reconfiguring their common boundary lines to eliminate errors in the recording associated with the similar division in 2012. Second reading.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions relative to the bill?
Mr.
Seeing
Mayor,
none, yes, Joe.
I just wanted to acknowledge the second reading, and I know Mr. Scott wanted me to say thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2616.
Councilmember Bros.
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan.
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Galani.
Yes.
Councilmember Hopper.
Yeah.
Councilmember Jaxi.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
Okay, the bill passed. Moving next to Bill 2617, it's before the council for first reading. It concerns wards 1, 7, and 8. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Garitano, seconded by Councilmember Galani. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Sorry about that. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2617.
Bill 2617, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute a city contractor agreement on behalf of the City of Wildwood, Missouri with Gamma Tree Service LLC for the planting of new trees within the public right-of-way in the town center area. First reading.
Okay, thank you. Rick, do you have anything further you want to mention relative to Bill 2617?
No, Mr. Mayor, but I would, as I had mentioned earlier, would respectfully ask for 2 readings of this bill if we could do it tonight so that we can get the work started sooner rather than later, since we're in prime tree planting season right now.
Okay, so I definitely respect and appreciate that request, and we can do that. I just want to mention one thing on doing second readings, and this is just my personal view. Second readings on lot splits and those kinds of things at the same meeting are one thing. Second readings at the same meeting that expend money, in my opinion, are different, because the whole purpose of second readings is to give residents the opportunity to comment. And when you're doing that in one meeting, you're cutting that in half. So I'm not speaking for or against. If you want to make a motion, we can do it. I just would ask that we please keep that in mind with respect to our second readings. So is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Garitano, second by Councilmember Edens. Again, a 2/3 vote to do a second reading. All in favor of the motion is required. All in favor of the motion for a second reading, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion for second reading carries. Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2617 a second time.
Bill 2617, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute a city contractor agreement on behalf of the city of Wildwood, Missouri with Gamma Tree Service LLC for the planting of new trees within the public right of way in the town center area. Second reading.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2617.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo, Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember Hopper,
Yes.
Councilmember Jaxi,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2617 has passed. Finally, the first readings, moving to Bill 2618. This is before the council, coming from the Admin Public Works Committee, and it concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Garitano. Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2618.
Bill 2618, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, amending subsection A of section 110.210 of the Code of Ordinances of the city of Wildwood, Missouri by enacting a new subparagraph 17 and establishing a policy for remote participation in city council meetings. First reading.
Thank you. And I know a lot of work was put in on this by the Admin PW Committee, Public Works Committee. Thank you so much for all that work. As chair of that committee, Councilmember Garitano, is there anything you would like to say relative to the bill?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Relative to the bill, just a high-level summary. This is the opportunity to provide some flexibility so that we can continue to function, especially even post-COVID, so that there is that flexibility for council members when needed. However, we have some good guardrails in the bill, and this is great work by the committee. And also want to call out former council member Remy, who was very passionate about this. So there are guardrails in there to make sure that it's not overly used and only in certain conditions, so forth. So that's my recap of the bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Edens, did you want to make a motion for a second reading?
We can do that. I didn't know how everyone was comfortable with this. I'd also add that we tried to be a lot more inclusive if you had a disability or a long-term health issue, perhaps, something like that after COVID, that's written in there with providing a level of proof. And I will say, I think it was just myself and Councilmember Bertolino. I think we were the only ones that objected to one of the amendments, if I remember right, about the number of absences. I think we actually wanted a cap that was lower. I'm not a sore loser. I'm not going to, amend that right now. I just kind of wanted to publicly state that in case anybody else was seeing the same thing in the wording. But yes, I will make an motion for a second reading tonight.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second to the motion for second reading? Second by Councilmember Farmer. Is there any discussion on the motion for second reading of Bill 2618? Councilmember Bartoni?
The only question I have is, and I saw the 48-hour notice on there, but is there some sort of a provision or whatever that, if you got exposed to somebody this morning that may have had COVID, that, so you're not going to be able to show up, you could do it remotely, or, a year from now, COVID's gone and you just have the flu, came down with the flu in 24 hours or something. Is there something in there that kind of allows us to still participate without giving the city clerk 20 or 48-hour notice?
The city attorney can answer this. I believe the answer is in C1, the second sentence, but I'll let him, since that's a legal
Okay,
question.
I figured it was in there. I just read it a couple of times and wasn't sure exactly where it was in there.
The short answer is yes.
You want to let us know where?
Yeah, and you're correct, Mayor. It is in C1.
And then my second question was, and Megan sent out an email earlier today. What was the difference between the one that was on the original agenda and what was sent out at 5 o'clock or whatever time it was sent out?
The mayor's nitpicks. We had a couple of things that needed to be capitalized, and there was one, or on a substantive level, they were just typos. I mean, there was a section that referenced another section, but that reference was incorrect. It was to be a different section. So it was nothing of material consequence. City Attorney Young.
No substance changes.
No.
Okay,
But
thank you.
Let's hear that from the city attorney, just because it's his document. So.
No, that's absolutely right. There were no substantive changes to this at all.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Seeing no further discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2618. We did vote on the 2/3.
Yeah.
No, we have not voted
Yes.
on the 2/3.
Yes.
So all in favor, thank you. All in favor of the motion for second reading, it takes 2/3 vote. Please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2618 for a second time.
Bill 2618, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, amending subsection A of section 110.210 of the Code of Ordinances of the city of Wildwood, Missouri by enacting a new subparagraph 17 and establishing a policy for remote participation in city council meetings, second reading.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2618.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer, Councilmember Nian,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni. Is
Yes.
that a yes?
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember Hopper, Councilmember Jaxi,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Okay, it is now policy once I sign that. And so one thing I just want to mention that I noticed in reviewing it today, that'll be different than what we've done before. There is a provision that if you're participating remotely and you want to leave the meeting, you need to announce that and let us know when you're coming back. So that's a little procedural change. And so once this becomes effective, which it will momentarily, please keep that in mind for those of you, those of us who participate remotely going forward. All right. Okay. Excellent. So then moving into resolutions, we have two. Resolution 2021-14 is the first one, and it concerns Ward 1. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2021-14? Ward 1. Made by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember Brost. Ms. Eldridge, please read the resolution.
Resolution 2021-14, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the acquisition of certain temporary construction and permanent easements in conjunction with the construction of the Manchester Road Shared Use Path project within the city.
Okay, thank you. Rick, do you have anything, or Joe, further you want to mention relative to this resolution? I think it's Rick. These are for
Yes, sir.
easements.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do not, but again, the department is available for any questions from the city council.
All right. Any questions for Rick? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to adopt resolution 2021-14, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Resolution is adopted. Last, resolution 2021-15 is before the council and it concerns Ward 6. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 2021-15? Made by Councilmember Rambo, seconded by Councilmember Jaxi. Ms. Eldridge, please read the resolution.
Resolution 2021-15, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to execute a contract with Hartman Walsh Painting Company for the power washing, painting, and general maintenance of the pedestrian bridge over Carr Creek, which is located along the southern extension of the Al Foster Memorial Trail.
Thank you. Director of Planning, Joe Benich, is there anything you'd like to mention relative to this resolution?
This matter was presented at work session relative to a committee recommendation and support. The resolution reflects the committee's recommendation and city council's direction, and the department's available for any comments or questions. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Joe? Councilmember Clark?
I would just request that we get an MSDS for the chemical they're going to use because it's going, the power washing is going to be going right into Carr Creek.
Do you want that and just send out for information to the council on it, or?
Yes, if you know it now, if you know what chemical it is, we could always look it up ourselves, but yeah, I just would like to know what detergent they're using and what specific chemicals.
Joe, do you have that information at the moment?
I do not, Mr. Mayor, but I will have Mr. Cruz contact Hartman Walsh Painting Company and ask for that information and then forward it out, if acceptable, via email to all of you.
Without objection, that's what we'll do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further discussion on the resolution? See no further discussion on the resolution. All in favor of the motion to adopt resolution 2021-15, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Resolution is adopted. So that takes us, nothing under miscellaneous, unless Councilmember Edens.
I just want to say a big thanks to city staff for the plein air event. Gary, Bree, Steve, and Joe. I had a blast and I have the sunburn on my back to prove it. Didn't make anything good, but it was just very, very, very well done. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Garetano.
Sure, just a quick announcement. On June 15th, the Missouri Municipal League will have its first ever Metro East region, which includes St. Louis County, Jefferson, Franklin, and parts of Lincoln County, I believe, that will be invited from an elected official's perspective. We'll be invited here in Wildwood. We will be holding our dinner meeting at the Wildwood Hotel. There's a change in the venue, so we'll be in the Wildwood Hotel. There'll be an invitation that'll be going out to these elected officials, quite a long list, I think about 1,300 altogether. So this will be, again, our first regional meeting ever, and I'm really happy that we're having it here in Wildwood. So if you can make it, it is June 15th, and please let the city clerk know so that you can get signed up. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess under announcements, I would just mention, in case you're not aware, House Bill 362. What is it again? Is it 362?
I'm sorry, what was that?
House Bill 362. That,
Yes.
yeah,
that is
House Bill
correct.
362 has passed the House and Senate, and Wildwood has a presence in this bill in a big way. And as long as it's signed from the governor, if it's signed by the governor, then it will become law. And that amends the Sunshine Law that will not force municipalities or other governments to reveal residents' addresses in Sunshine Law requests when those addresses and email addresses as well have been provided to the city simply to obtain our newsletter or other information on events. So it corrects what was previously, as we all know, an injustice. And we're happy for that. Councilmember Dodwell.
Any update on the Wayfair?
Any update on the Wayfair legislation, Joe?
I have not heard, but this, I think, is the final week. And so there'll be a lot of excitement around that and several other bills.
Steve, do you have any update on it? Okay. All right. We'll see. Okay. Councilmember Bartoni.
Thank you. And I agree on the sunshine part. I guess there's a lot of things that can be said that started right here in Wildwood for the wrong reasons, but thank God it was corrected. But I want to recognize Steve Cross. We had a little bit of an incident, so to speak, in Ward 2 in Turnberry, kind of a neighbor versus neighbor situation, but Steve responded very quickly. I think their police department was out there. We had code enforcement out there. We had a lot of people out there in a very short period of time, but definitely made our resident happy. And Steve, thanks for your help and quick response.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for bringing that up, Councilmember Bartoni. And thank you, Steve and Captain and others. We appreciate that. And we always like it when they end well. Okay. If there's nothing further, I would ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting of the City Council. Made by Councilmember Farmer, second by Councilmember Galani. As you know, it's non-debatable. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Any abstentions? We are adjourned. Thank you so much for a very productive evening.